in clarifying this issue of fossil fuels, how to think about it and then how to explain it to others, there's some things where I just need to develop new ideas or new ways of thinking about things. And so there's arguing to 100. And then the idea Bob is referring to, I use the term knowledge system throughout the book. And this is to capture that when we are told what expert conclusions, including conclusions about what to do, are, we need to recognize that we don't just get those conclusions automatically from the expert researchers in the field. There's a process by which what those researchers find is synthesized, disseminated, and then evaluated in terms of leading to action. And I show that basically at every stage of this process, there are big distortions. So just in terms of evaluation, what I point out in chapter 1 is that these are so many of these expert conclusions that we're taught, particularly we should rapidly eliminate fossil fuels, ignore the huge benefits of fossil fuels. And so I use the example of Michael Mann, one of our leading, what I call designated experts on this issue. And he has a whole book about fossil fuels and talks about fossil fuels in agriculture, but only talks about negatives or alleged negatives. He doesn't talk about the fact that the whole world would starve without fossil fuels or their equivalent. And there's no reason to believe their agricultural functions, including fertilizer, can be replaced in any reasonable time frame. And this kind of thinking or non-thinking is what leads us to an energy crisis like today, where we're having a fertilizer crisis because people like Michael Mann told us we should make decisions about this issue while ignoring the benefits. And then in terms of, disseminators, this is the most widely known thing, but kind of what the IPCC comes up with in its reports then gets distorted by news outlets, but also by the IPCC itself. It has what are called summaries for policymakers that take the most extreme parts or exaggerate them and communicate them. But then also, so that's what I call dissemination distortion. But then at the level of synthesis, I argue, and this is different from most people who talk about IPCC, I think the IPCC itself is fundamentally a terrible synthesizer of knowledge, and mainly because they too ignore the benefits of fossil fuels, including they ignore the fact that thanks in large part to fossil fuels, we're safer than ever from climate. So I call this climate mastery. And you cannot talk intelligently about climate and the threat of climate change if you don't recognize that we're far safer than ever from climate. We've got a 98% decline in climate-related disaster deaths over the last 100 years, and the UN doesn't mention this in any of its reports. That's like a polio report that doesn't mention that we have a polio vaccine and that we're far better off. And then I also mentioned that the researchers themselves, there are a lot of problematic incentives there, including, well, the government funds all this stuff, and the government people funding this are very interested in catastrophe scenarios that justify increases of power by them. And so what you find is even if all the researchers are well-intentioned and doing their best, the action conclusions that we're told can be totally, totally wrong. And that's what I'm trying to break people's idea that if we're told the experts say we should do X, that must be basically right. And the point is, no, it can be 180 degrees wrong. And in fact, I show in chapter 2, the track record is it has often been 180 degrees wrong. That is, they've recommended policies that would have ended billions of lives prematurely.